الله بالخير. هذه ليست حرباً، إنها إبادة جماعية ممهدة بعقيدة الإبادة يغذيها تواطؤ الغرب. التجويع بات سلاحاً، القانون الدولي محض خداع، هو خيار للمحتل المعتدي وليس حتمياً. عقيدة الإبادة تقدم كاستراتيجية عسكرية تجمع بين تكتيكات الأرض المحروقة والعقاب الجماعي والقصف المناطقي والذكاء الاصطناعي. جربت للمرة الأولى في الضاحية الجنوبية لبيروت، ويجري نشرها واستخدامها بالكامل الآن في غزة. توصف بأنها مخطط للنزاعات المستقبلية، والعالم يتفرج. ما خطورة عقيدة الإبادة التي تنتهجها إسرائيل؟ وهل هناك أدلة على أن تكتيكات الإبادة تستخدم بشكل منهجي في الاستراتيجية العسكرية الإسرائيلية؟ ماذا يعني الاعتراف بدولة فلسطينية في ظل ما تواجهه فلسطين من مجازر إسرائيلية مستمرة؟ وماذا يطلق على استراتيجية الإبادة الجسدية والنفسية التي يواجهها الفلسطينيون الذين يقاومون التهجير؟ كيف تؤثر التقنيات الحديثة مثل الذكاء الاصطناعي في الممارسات الموصوفة بالإبادة؟ وهل يعالج المجتمع الدولي الآثار الأخلاقية لهذه الاستراتيجية المقيتة بشكل فعال أم يتجاهلها؟ نرحب بكم ونرى ونسمع أكثر من ضيفنا دان ستاينبوك، الخبير الاستراتيجي العالمي ومؤلف سقوط إسرائيل وعقيدة الإبادة في البعد الأقرب. هذه الميادين، وأنا زينب صفار، خليكم ويانا. Dr. Dan Steinbock, a strategist of the multipolar world and the founder of Difference Group. Salam and welcome to Al Mayadeen. This is the proximate aspect. I'm Zainab Al-Safa. Such a pleasure to have you, sir.
My pleasure.
Most welcome. Well, your recent book, The Obliteration Doctrine, which adds a new term to the lexicon on genocide, suggests that Israel pursues a policy aimed explicitly at the destruction of Palestinian society. Is there evidence, Dr. Dan, that obliteration tactics, including artificial intelligence and technology, are systematically employed or institutionalized in Israeli military strategy?
I would say that the short answer is yes and yes. If you let me explain. The obliteration doctrine itself has a long history, and it combines several lethal forms of warfare, all of which, by the way, are banned by the Geneva Conventions. First of all, there's the scorched earth destruction. This was known already with the US Civil War, Indian Wars, and Nazi Germany's war against the Soviet Union. However, the obliteration doctrine, I believe, goes further because it tries to or seeks to destroy the entire infrastructure of the target population in order to cause mass displacement. Second, collective punishment, which targets individuals not responsible for perpetrated acts. It undermines modern legal systems, yet it has been widely deployed in counterinsurgencies by the former colonial powers.
Mm-hmm.
Third, civilian victimization, which I consider simply horrible. It is the use of violence against non-combatants. It is deliberate collateral damage, not collateral damage as a side effect, but that is its ultimate purpose. And in addition to brutal violence, it relies on forced expulsion, torture, and so on. The example might be the US strategic Hamlet program during the Vietnam War. Fourth, and certainly not least, massive and indiscriminate area bombing. In the beginning of the so-called Gaza war, we heard a lot about targeted bombing. And within a month or two, we found out by the CIA and other intelligence communities that that was not the case at all. 50–60% of the bombing was indiscriminate. It was also coupled with artificial intelligence, AI. This, I believe, is the most chilling mix of AI because it's coupled with genocidal atrocities. And Gaza may well be the first test of what I call algocide. In other words, algorithmic war when it's coupled with genocide. We have never seen anything like this before, and hopefully we won't see this in the future.
You mean AI technology coupled with the military warfare?
Yes, as an inherent part of it. We found out already towards the end of 2023, certainly in early 2024, there were public disclosures by the Plus 972 magazine about the kind of software programs that were being used, which make killing other people simply a matter of probability, not a matter of judgment.
This is on the Israeli side, sir, but does the international community effectively address or ignore the ethical implications of such obliteration strategies? Is there a moral distinction between military necessity and obliteration in modern asymmetric warfare?
I feel that the international community has entirely failed Gaza and the Palestinians. I also feel that the moral distinction between military necessity and obliteration in modern asymmetric warfare, the line has entirely been blurred, and on purpose, perhaps, in order to make possible the kind of gross moral indifference that we now see. It was precisely this moral indifference that actually prompted me to write these two books, The Fall of Israel and The Obliteration Doctrine. However, the obliteration doctrine is not something new. It was first tested nearly 2 decades ago, before October 7, 2023, by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force in Dahiya, a predominantly Shia Muslim neighborhood in Beirut.
The Dahiya doctrine, true.
Yes, and I'm using the term obliteration doctrine because I want to expand the concept a little bit to include the kind of aspects that weren't available yet in 2006 or 7. What frightened me the most at the time, that is about 17, 18 years ago, was the indifference. We saw in the aftermath that there was no international intervention. At the same time, the Israeli leaders, not all of them, but many Israeli military leaders said and pledged that they would deploy it in their quote-unquote next war. It frightened me, as I think it frightened some observers, because we knew that there was already a vision of the coming nightmare available. So why didn't the international community react then when they could have preempted this catastrophe? Very hard to say.
Right. Now, in another sense, what about the psychological and physical obliteration faced by Palestinians who resist displacement and genocide? Is the concept of necrotization, as you term it, a justified lens to view the Palestinian struggle, or does it oversimplify complex resistance dynamics?
Necrotization is a term that I simply use to describe the attitudes of those Israelis who are targeting the Palestinians, be they combatants or non-combatants, which is most often the case. They actually take the role of God, judging who will die and who will live. It is a massive, horrible strategy in that sense. And there's no justification for it as far as I can understand. In the past 2 years, the world has been watching all of this in real time. The result has been 250,000 Palestinians that have been killed, injured, or maimed. Now, up to 70% of the victims are women and children. And it is very, very, very challenging to understand what role do they have in this kind of a nightmare. I think President Lula of Brazil understood this in the very early weeks when he said that this is not a war. This is a war against children, perhaps, but not a war in traditional sense. I would add,
it's a war against humanity, sir.
Yes, and it's even worse, I feel, it's mass butchery. It
Mhm,
has nothing to do with traditional warfare where you have armies or fighters on both sides.
mhm,
You're targeting those who are most vulnerable.
mhm,
And I personally began to use the term genocidal atrocities, I think around October, November 23. In spring 24, when I was concluding the book, The Fall of Israel, I felt and believed that the conditions of genocide, as defined by the UN Genocide Convention, had already been fulfilled.
mhm,
And I think that, as to your question, when you talk about the psychological and physical obliteration strategy, I think that the obliteration doctrine goes even further. It goes to the term of genocide, the way Raphael Lemkin, the pioneer, the architect of Genocide Convention, had in mind, but which was nixed, which was eliminated from the final convention due to the former colonial powers, the global north.
mhm,
He talked about cultural genocide, which means also the devastation of infrastructure, meaning Palestinian history, schools, universities, mosques, libraries, religious institutions, and so on, health services, hospitals, clinics, emergency services, archaeological facts, even journalists who would try to tell this story. And
mhm,
worst of all, what has been done is an ecocide. Much
mhm.
of Gaza is now virtually uninhabitable death zone. These are the reasons I feel why this is the moral catastrophe of the 21st century.
Yes, that's very true. It's even more than psychological and physical, it's also a cultural obliteration. Now, the state of Palestine is recognized as a sovereign nation by 157 UN member states, representing almost 81% of members. What does that recognition, Dr. Dam, mean in terms of the Israeli ongoing pogroms? Is it just paying lip service? And in what ways does the current annexation regime, through both legal and administrative changes, spearheaded, of course, by Smotrich, fundamentally foreclose the basic premises of a so-called two-state solution?
Well, it's first of all interesting to conclude that the number of countries who recognize the state of Palestine now is not that different any longer from the number of countries who recognize the state of Israel. This is something very intriguing, something very new. Unfortunately, the recognition as such will not halt the obliteration of Gaza. It will not halt the violent pogroms of the far-right messianic settlers in the West Bank. I think it is the first step in the right direction, and it will certainly increase pressure on the Netanyahu cabinet, but it comes terribly, terribly late. 50 years ago, before the 1973 Yom Kippur War, I was touring the occupied territories. I interviewed both the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Israelis saw a bright future. They felt that the peace was coming. The Palestinians saw no future, and the peace just further and further away. And it was this massive contradiction that made me see the settlements as a ticking time bomb. And I believed then, around 1974, when I took part in the demonstrations against these settlements, that these settlements had the potential to subvert Israeli democracy,
Mhm.
endanger its Jewish and Arab citizens, and certainly the Palestinians, and they could morph into apartheid or worse, causing a cycle of forever wars with these Israel's Arab neighbors.
Mhm.
And here we are 50 years later, and this time bomb, as I call it, has exploded.
Mhm. In a similar vein, well, recently, sir, the international media has highlighted the mass, horrendous, horrific starvation in Gaza. This famine was first weaponized 18 years ago in the Strip. How? And might you slice it out and unveil some facts in this regard?
This is a very good question. Lately, I've wrote several briefings on this. It is only recently, now, perhaps since August, that international media has highlighted the mass famine in Gaza. Yet these famines go way back. In 2006 Palestinian election that I think you were alluding to, Hamas won the majority in all occupied territories, Palestinian territories. And that was the time when Israel and the West launched the economic sanctions against the Palestinians, the leadership, the politicians, the people. Then came a blockade as Israel sought to push the Gazan economy to the brink of collapse, quote unquote, from the WikiLeaks. Now, after October 7, there have been three waves of famines. And let's remember the fact that before they started, 4 out of 5 Gaza's residents were already dependent on humanitarian aid, and many suffered from widespread food insecurity. The first famine wave happened in spring 2024. That's when we saw the first starvation deaths. Why on earth didn't we see it somewhere else except Al Mayadeen, Al Jazeera, and certain other outlets? We didn't see that in CNN. We didn't see that in BBC at the time. The second wave happened in June 2024, when the IPC, the International Famine Watchdog, reported that Gaza's population was at high risk of famine. There were no photos at mass level. It is only the third wave, following last August, when IPC declared again the widespread famine in Gaza. That was when those photos became available. And that, I think, is when the international community, people of different nations, began to understand how serious this really is. And many began to understand that, unfortunately, international media had failed them. And one could also make the case that this is weaponized mass starvation, and it has always been present in settled colonialism. It was there in American Indian wars. It was there in German Herero and Nama genocide in Africa, and Nazis had their hunger plan against the Soviets.
But sir, allow me just, to calculate the number of calories that each person needs. This is horrific.
It is absolutely terrific. I feel that I looked for hard data. And in order to explain this to readers, I took a look at the calorie intake, as far as we know it, in different extreme situations. Indian Empire, towards the end of 19th century, when there was also a purposeful effort to use famine as a means, or starvation as a means to subjugate the population. It caused the death of 6 to 8 million Indians. And then there was, of course, the Nazi concentration camps. And what I found most frightening is that in certain parts of Gaza, already in 2024, measured in terms of total food deliveries into the strip, the calorie intake was at par or less than in Nazi concentration camps.
True.
A worse situation might be only found in Warsaw Ghetto. But the mere fact that this is at that level should awaken all of us.
Right. In your previous book, The Fall of Israel, you argue that Israel's activities are causing a perfect storm in West Asia. What's driving this tempest, sir?
I was trying to find the simplest possible explanation that I could quickly give you the bottom line. I call it the great conjuncture, when 4 different forces converge. One, the Palestinian ethnic cleansing or expulsions from Palestine since late 1940s, okay, 1967, and now in the so-called, what is called the Second Nakba. Second, the aggressive expansion of Jewish settlements in occupied territories. Third, half a century of failed American diplomacy in the Middle East that has caused a lot of destabilization, but not enduring peace. The ties between Israel and the United States that do not really bind, but are blind amidst this kind of atrocities. And finally, instead of fostering peace in the region as the United States could, it is the massive military aid to Israel, some $23 billion since October the 7th, that has then amplified Israel's parallel militarization, which is harming its economy, society, politics, military, and its very moral fiber. So in order to overcome this, I feel that you have to end the cleansing of the Palestinians, you have to end the illegal occupation, you have to end the arms flows and financing and the military aggression. These are the hard conditions for sustainable peace.
But sir, Gaza's rubble is seen, especially by President Trump, as a real estate bonanza. And the jackals are back. Jared Kushner is the deal maker, Tony Blair is the polished frontman. However, you argue that this strategy is a profound miscalculation. It is a desperate gambit that accelerates Israel's geopolitical decline and isolation rather than securing its future. With Saudi Arabia and other Arab states, of course, publicly opposing forcible displacement, how can the Trump administration realistically believe its vision for Gaza is still viable?
I think the core condition is that the global South cannot confront the United States because of its military might, and neither can the rest of the West that might disagree with the United States. And China is willing to work with the United States, but nobody wants to go to that point. And I think that that's creating an illusion of impunity. And that impunity goes from the United States to Israel. In the process, the Biden and Trump administrations have failed Gaza. In the process, the United States and large EU powers, those who transfer arms to Israel, are complicit to genocide. It is a terrible, terrible consequence of the situation. I would ask everybody to consider this. Israel pulls the trigger, but the weapons are transferred from and financed by the United States, as well as the EU powers, Germany, Italy, UK, even Spain. Perhaps Biden and Trump administration have tried to make the Middle East safe to American capitalism, but their complicity is eroding credibility of their countries as neutral brokers in the area. There's another great power aspect to this. I think that the US administrations still seek to marginalize China from the region via the Abraham Accords, as Trump likes to call them, or the Grand Bargain, as Biden likes to call them. And that makes absolutely no sense to my mind to regional economies which seek peace and economic development. They do not want to have more destabilization and regime change. They've experienced too many generations of that, and certainly not genocide. This is something that's very hard perhaps to understand when you are further away from the scene or the theater of crime. But that's what it is. It's a crime against humanity.
Right, sir. I'm afraid time has run short. I'm obliged to you for answering my questions eloquently. Dr. Dan Steinbuch, a strategist of the multipolar world, thank you very much for joining us on The Proximate Aspect, sir.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Always a pleasure to have you. ببراعة تحليلية تقشع الأبحاث الثاقبة للدكتور دان ستاينبوك طبقات الصراع في القرن ال21 لتكشف ليس فقط الدمار الذي أحدثته عقيدة الإبادة، بل أيضا التواطؤ الفاقع والمشين للقوى العالمية في استمرار الفظائع الجماعية في غزة. ستاينبوك يبين كيف تقصر الاتفاقيات القانونية والمؤسسات الدولية بشكل روتيني، محولة منع الإبادة إلى مجرد خطاب، بينما تسهل الإفلات من العقاب على أرض الواقع. من الدمج المروع للذكاء الاصطناعي مع الحرب العشوائية إلى الصراحة الصالفة لأولئك الذين يخططون للدمار، يحذر ستاينبوك من أن ما يحدث ليس شذوذا تاريخيا، بل هو عرض لفشل النظام من الغرب إلى الشرق ومن الصمت إلى الاستراتيجية. خلاصة القول، إذا كان بمقدور المجتمع الدولي أن يعرف جريمة الإبادة الجماعية بهذا الوضوح، ولكنه يفشل باستمرار في منعها أو المعاقبة عليها، فهل بتنا مجرد متفرجين على الكارثة أم مهندسين لعالم جديد لم يعد فيه وجود لأرضية أخلاقية؟ من كل الميادين حياكم.